I've got a rental GH5 from Lens Rentals, and I am a firm believer in try before you buy. So I did not pre-order the GH5. I do not currently have one on order. This just showed up today, and one of the first things you should do when you get any new camera is go through the menus. The menus can teach you so much about the camera, and I think it's a lot more hands-on than reading an instruction manual. So we're going to go through the menus, kind of see some of the inner workings of the GH5, things that you need to be aware of, and maybe some of the things that you can just ignore. To get into the menu, just click the main kind of menu enter button. It's pretty much the main button where your thumb sits. And the first thing you'll notice on the GH5 is that it's very similar to the GH4 menu system, but there are a few upgrades. And I do call them upgrades because they are nice features to have. The first option, I'm in the video mode. There are different menus for the photo mode. Specifically, we're going to be looking at the video features on the GH5. The first mode is this, the first menu item is this kind of additional video features list. And I really like it because it gives you some access to some handy features that you may use quite frequently. For example, you can easily switch to the anamorphic mode right from that first menu. So if you're shooting anamorphic or you're bouncing back and forth between, you can turn it on right here in that first menu item. We've also got loop recording video that can be turned on or off, synchro scan on or off, and here is where you get that shutter speed gain operation. I talk all the time about using shutter angle. Now this is by default set to seconds, so on the main menu you'll see that you have your shutter speed like you would traditionally see on any kind of DSLR, but one of the great things that Panasonic has done with the GH line is added the ability to use shutter angle instead. So I always use shutter angle ISO. It's right here, very easy to find on the GH5, and now that gives you that shutter angle so you can set your degrees. Just set it to 180, and no matter what your frame rate is, you'll always have the proper shutter speed because you're just using shutter angle. 180 degree, set it and forget it. Going back into the menus, we've got a really handy feature, which is the new waveforms and vector scopes that they've added. Now, the implementation on the GH5, it's a little big and bulky in terms of the way the waveform displays. The display on the GH5 itself is rather small. It is a portable hybrid camera after all, so I can't really knock it for not having enough screen real estate, but for this waveform it does take up an absurd amount of the screen. It's really nice to have as a more professional feature. I'm really not aware of many other cameras in this class that offer a waveform like this. Most have some kind of histogram to judge exposure, but not waveform, which is really handy and a little bit more accurate than kind of the basic histogram. You've also got vector scope, so you can kind of position these wherever you want, and vector scope's a little bit more for color than exposure, but you can use either or. It'd be very challenging, I think, to have both on screen. You basically couldn't see what you were looking at. So you can turn those on or off, but again, it's really nice that it's in that first menu item, so you can just kind of scroll down, turn it on, turn it off, however you need. And there is a second kind of sub menu to this first area. The way the GH5 works, it's got these kind of main master menu items on the left, and then inside of each one we've kind of got pages that we can look at. So on the second page of that first menu item, we've got V-Log-L View Assist. This is really nice that they've incorporated LUTs into the GH5. The GH4 got V-Log-L as an upgrade, a paid firmware upgrade. The GH5, it's the same kind of thing where it's still V-Log, it's still almost, it's essentially the same as on the GH4, but now you can actually monitor with a LUT. So you can turn this on and off, and you can select a LUT, you can load them in here. This rental unit from Lens Rentals came with V-Log 709, just kind of a standard one built in. I'm not sure if that comes with just having V-Log built into the camera, or when you do that upgrade, but you can monitor with the LUT on or off, and that's really handy for judging focus and having a little bit more contrast, a little bit more saturation on the monitor, but still recording that full dynamic range of log. Back into the menus, we've got the second page of kind of more video features, and this is where you're going to find stuff that's a little bit more familiar to people who've shot with the GH4. First of all, we got our record format. You can use AVC HD, MP4, MP4 LPCM, but I would always stick with MOV. I really like the way it just records movie files, and it's a lot more stable and from my perspective, a lot easier to work with for editing. We've also got record quality. This is where Panasonic still hasn't quite hit the mark. And a lot of camera companies do this, but I've called it out in previous videos. Having resolutions and frame rates and bit rates all tied to individual settings that you have to scrub through a list to pick the one you want is really cumbersome. It works and it's fine once you kind of memorize where everything's at. It's easy to get to, but what it really should be is one menu item for resolution, one menu item for frame rate, and one menu item for bit rate or kind of the codec you're using. Having them all paired together in this kind of just list here is very awkward to use. Something like the Blackmagic Ursa Mini does a much better job of kind of separating each of these settings into their own options, and that way you can easily swap between frame rates and still keep the same resolution, or easily keep the same frame rate and swap between resolutions. They're not tied to one another. But if you're interested in going in here, what you will maybe have noticed already is the GH5 has a Cinema 4K mode that's actually 2398. The GH4 had a Cinema 4K mode, but it was a true 24p rather than the 2398. 2398 is a little bit more common, more people use it and more are familiar with it, so I'm glad to see that we've got that mode on the GH5. And they have upgraded the bit rate to 150 megabits per second compared to the GH4's 100, and we also have a codec that's 10-bit 422 color sampling, which is even better just for better color accuracy and better color grading. But you don't always have to use that. Another thing you'll see in here is there's a 4K 60 mode now on the GH5. That is an upgrade over the GH4, but unfortunately that 60 frames per second mode is limited to 420 8-bit. You still get the 150 megabits per second, but your color sampling is not as accurate. Going back a step, we've got time code on the GH5. You can set this up to display on or off. You can have it free run, record run, time code value. You've got so many different options here for time code, and that's really nice to see on a camera of this class having such robust time code features. We've also got continuous autofocus on or off. Depending on your shooting style, you could turn that on or off, doesn't really matter. Autofocus custom setting video. So this is where you can get in and really dial in your autofocus speed and sensitivity. There's a little bit of controversy online about the autofocus on the GH5 currently. I still have to do more testing myself to really know where I land, but I'm sure I'm going to be in this menu item playing around with the custom settings, because from first glance, I'm not really enjoying the autofocus on the GH5. It doesn't seem to be all that great, but it is brand new, so I can't give my final judgment just yet. Next up, we got photo style, very similar to the GH4. We've got Cinelike V, Cinelike D. We've got some custom stuff in here: portrait, scenery, monochrome, natural, vivid, standard, Vlog L. When I shoot Vlog L, I turn the sharpness all the way down, I turn the noise reduction all the way down. I don't want the camera doing any kind of funky processing. I like to save my processing for post-production, but that's where it's at. And if you're going to be shooting on the GH4 or the GH5, I'm kind of, this is an issue I have with Panasonic and these cameras. They offer the log mode, which I love shooting log. Most of my stuff I like to color, but Vlog L is still not that great from my initial test impressions. Still reserving final judgment, so I probably shouldn't get too in-depth on that, but from a dynamic range and a picture profile setting, the GH5 is not looking to be as substantial of an upgrade from the GH4 as I think it probably should be. A lot of other features, don't get me wrong, there's tons of stuff in this camera. It's a great option for a lot of shooters, but if you're looking for a big upgrade from the GH4, at first glance, the GH5 doesn't really look to offer that, but I will have more videos coming talking about that stuff in the near future. We've also got filter settings. You can set this stuff. This is kind of that like Instagram-y kind of, I honestly don't know why this is in the camera. I mean, maybe you can get some use out of it, do something funky, but really most professionals are probably not going to be using that, so you can probably skip the filter settings. Illuminance level, we've got 0 to 1023. You'll see that because, and it's set that way because we have Vlog. I can't really adjust it, and we're shooting 10-bit, so that's why that's the range of luminance levels. But you probably can adjust that if you're in one of the 8-bit modes. You probably can go down and change it to, probably because I'm in Vlog, that's why I can't adjust it. But I really wouldn't mess with that much anyway. probably just leave it to the maximum, and then you can do any manipulation you want in post-production. Back down to the second page, we've got our metering modes. These are all adjustable outside of the menu as well on the quick menu, but they're in here if you want. Eye resolution, just skip it. ISO sensitivity for video. You can have a lower limit and an upper limit setting. In here, you can max out the upper limit and the lower limit if you want. But there is an auto feature in the ISO setting now in video mode, so that's actually kind of handy. You could kind of get that on the GH4, but they've actually kind of made it a little bit more straightforward on the GH5 in terms of being able to set that. Here we've got shading comp. I actually don't know what that is. I got to do a little bit more research. That's one of the things that doesn't stand out to me as being super familiar, so I've got to look at that, but I'm guessing I'm probably going to leave it off. Diffraction compensation. So anything that's like automatic, I kind of stay away from too. I kind of leave that stuff off. But diffraction is basically when you have your two-stop down on your lens, so you're shooting at like f/22, let's say, you start getting diffraction where you're not getting the full sharpest resolution that the sensor is capable of. So I can test that out a little bit, but seeing as it's an automatic thing, that makes me hesitant to use it. Stabilizer. Here's one of the big new features on the GH5, and it's the stabilization mode. You can actually stabilize your footage internally with the sensor. So even if your lens isn't stabilized, you can still have stabilization. And first impressions are really, really good. I'm finding it very, very useful. I've shot a lot of stuff handheld, and it seems to be working really well. I do have a stabilized Lumix lens as well, so that's definitely adding to it, and they're kind of working together. But I got to do some more testing to really kind of push that stabilizer to the limit. We've got some teleconversion modes. Basically, that crops in onto the sensor to kind of extend your focal range. You technically lose megapixels or lose resolution if you want to look at it that way. But from what I've seen other people say, that it actually works pretty well. And so you can kind of just punch in, crop into your sensor. So you're kind of adding more crop factor, but you're thus getting a longer focal length. So that's kind of nice if you have a prime and you want kind of two different focal lengths, or you've got a zoom and you want to push it just a little bit further, but still record 4K. You're not losing resolution in the recording, you're just cropping the sampling of pixels on the sensor. We've also got a digital zoom feature, which is going to push that even further. So you could really max this out and crop in and go 4K, 4hex, and really just push it. It's not showing much right now because the camera's pointed at the wall, but it's going to be fun to kind of play around with some of these settings and see how much it impacts image quality and how much flexibility I have there with just kind of extending the focal length. We've got picture mode and record. I'm assuming that's not an option because I'm in vlog mode. Most of these options, like flicker decrease and stuff, they're grayed out. A lot of that is tied to the picture profile that you're in. So if you're shooting vlog, you're essentially not you're shooting without a picture profile, I guess you could think of it that way. So some of the stuff that's grayed out is really stuff that I stay away from in general because I really don't want the camera doing too much extra processing, doing any kind of automatic stuff that's going to mess with my footage. Timestamp, record, on or off. I actually don't know what that's going to do. The date and time will be added to the video. No. Why would you ever want to do that? What is this, 1997? No thanks. I'm not recording home videos. I don't need the timestamp on the video. Leave it off. Mic level display. I always turn this on just so I can see my meters right there on the screen. You can see that those meters are actually improved from the GH4. They look a little different, a little bigger, a little more prominent, a little nicer, I'd say. And I like having them on just so I can make sure that I'm recording sound, whether I'm plugging in a microphone or I'm just using the built-in mics. Mic level adjustment, I usually turn it down to -6, so I'm just not, too close to clipping or blowing out my audio, but that really just depends on the input. And the mic level limiter, this is something that's actually really, really handy. And even though I say I don't like to use automatic features, I really do like this. It works really well on the GH4, so I'm curious to see how it performs on the GH5. I imagine it's almost identical. But basically what this does is if you are too loud and you are close to clipping, it'll actually kind of knock that down a little bit to kind of save your audio from being too loud. So what I do on the GH4 all the time for vlogs and stuff, for content where I don't need super professional audio but still good sounding audio, I'll run a microphone kind of a little bit hotter than you might normally want to, just a little bit. And then any part where it's peaking or getting too loud, this limiter kicks in and kind of levels it off, so you get really nice even audio. If you listen to most of the audio on any of my YouTube videos, it's recorded with a similar method. I'm actually doing it right now for this video, so that's a little secret GH trick, if you will. Wind noise canceller, I always leave this off. Most of the time I'm not shooting in the wind, and if I am, the audio is probably garbage anyway, so just leave it off. Lens noise cut, special mic, those are all off right now and grayed out. Sound output real time. I've left it to real time, output sound directly from the microphone or output sound that will be recorded on the video. I've always left it to real time, but to be honest, I really don't know the difference between the two of these. Probably something I need to do a little bit more research on, but I've always left it to real time and it's never been a problem, but maybe I'm doing something wrong. I actually don't know, so I have to do a little bit more research on that one. HDMI record output, very familiar for GH4 users. You basically want the info off. If you're outputting HDMI, assume it's because you're recording to an external monitor. Maybe you're not, maybe you're just viewing, but you probably want the info off regardless, so it's a clean feed. Turn the info off. Down convert, you can leave it to auto, but sometimes, just for safety, you just set it to what exactly you want. You can probably leave it to auto and you'll be safe though. LUT HDMI display, you can turn the LUT on for the HDMI feed, but that kind of defeats the purpose if you are recording externally to an external monitor. Not that you necessarily have to on the GH5, because the internal codec is a lot better than it used to be on the GH4 in terms of color sampling, but if you want to have that LUT on the HDMI to display, you can turn it off. But most external monitors have LUT options anyway, so you can probably just leave this off. If you're doing a LUT, do it on the monitor. Don't send the recorder a LUT feed, because then that's exactly what's going to record, and then you're losing your log information. And for 4K 6-bit mode, 60-bit mode, we've got 422 10-bit, and it cannot record to the memory card with this setting when the HDMI cable is connected. So this is very similar to the GH4 in that when you set it to 10-bit mode, you can't, over the HDMI, you can't record internally. So back here, if you recall me talking about the record setting for 60 frames per second being limited to 8-bit in camera. So right here we've got that 8-bit 4K 60 setting. What you can actually do on the GH5 is for that HDMI record output, you can record 4K 60 as 10-bit 422 if you're outputting over HDMI and recording with an external recorder that can take that signal. So that would be something like the new Atomos Ninja Inferno can do 4K 60 and 422 10-bit. So it's nice that it's an option. And I think actually that's only limited to the 60 frames per second mode. So the other modes you should be getting 422 10-bit over HDMI, but I'll have to do a little bit more testing to make sure. I think this is just for the 60 frames, and that's nice that they offered that option for people who want to record externally with an HDMI feed. We got color bars. You can change the type of color bars if you ever use color bars. I frequently don't, so you can probably skip that. Next, we've got kind of the custom gear menu. This is for really in-depth adjustments. So just to go through it, we've got ISO increments. Do you want them in full stops or third stops? I usually go for third just for flexibility, but I usually only use the full stop. So I usually shoot 400, 800, 1600, 3200, kind of the full stops ISO, but every once in a while I might offset it by a third just for whatever, if it's a specific situation. I've also turned the extended ISO on. I want the full ISO range, just so I have that as an option, but I probably would never use it. Most of the time I'm shooting with lights anyway, so I'm using lower ISOs to keep the noise down. Exposure, compensation, reset, I honestly couldn't tell you what this is, but I'd say let's leave it off. AF, EF, E lock, that's your autofocus, auto exposure lock, and right now it's set to auto exposure lock, but there's also autofocus lock. There's both. You can play around with what you want to do, but for me, I'm very rarely using auto exposure or autofocus in general. It's just I'm mostly doing everything manual because I want the control, not the camera. Autofocus, auto exposure lock hold. You can turn that on or off if you want. Shutter autofocus on. Yeah, we want to, if we half press the shutter, we want it to autofocus. And half press release, you can turn that on or off. And quick autofocus on or off. Some of these are I'm not sure what quick autofocus, like what the difference would be between regular autofocus and quick autofocus. But I think a lot of this stuff you can play around with if you want. I'm going to play around with it a little bit in some of my more testing, but a lot of it you can kind of leave by default. This is getting into some stuff that you probably don't have to mess around with too much. Eye sensor AF, let's leave it off. Some of these I got to play around with. Pinpoint AF setting. So you can really get in here and dive deep into some of this stuff and really tweak it to your needs. But from my experience with the GH4, a lot of this stuff is not necessarily, you know, if you have a problem with the camera and you don't know where the setting is, this is the menu system to look through, because you can find stuff like this, like autofocus assist lamp. So if it's dimly lit conditions, there's a lamp that'll help you autofocus that comes on. But sometimes that can be really annoying and really distracting, so you might want to turn it off. For example, focus, release priority. You can, like, I really don't know. I just got this camera, haven't really messed around with this stuff. Probably should do more of that, but like I said, a lot of the stuff you can probably skip over. Focus switching for vertical horizon, okay, that's if you're shooting portrait or landscape. And autofocus, manual focus, on or off. Manual focus assist. Basically, if you start pulling on the lens, this is a feature on the GH4 and on the GH5 that if you start focusing with the lens, it will automatically punch in for you. So you can tweak how that actually responds and kind of what it looks like. If you find it annoying that it does the punch in when you start focusing with one of the electronic lenses, you can just turn it off. And there's also, you can do manual focus assist display. Is it take up the full LCD screen, or is it just the picture-in-picture mode? You can decide there as well. This is where you can set your function buttons. Quick menu, preset, custom. You can really customize this stuff if you want to get into it and set it up the way you want. You can set your dials. I actually prefer to do this. I got really used to shooting on Canons, and the way the GH5 and GH4 come by default, the dials are swapped. So you can go in here and change them back so that your thumb dial does your iris and your finger dial does your shutter. It's not set that way by default, but you can go in here and kind of play around with that and see if you can get it set up with something you like. There's a joystick setting here. Basically how you want the joystick to operate. Operation lock setting, joystick touchscreen cursor, on. Video button on. So that's like, I believe that is the record button maybe? Touch settings. Let's just skip it if we don't know what it is. Touch screen on, touch tab on, touch autofocus, touch pad autofocus. So if you didn't want the touch screen or you didn't want the touch tab, you can turn these things on or off. But I kind of like the default settings. I've gotten used to it on the GH4, so it's working just fine on the GH5. Monochrome, live view. If for some reason you wanted to judge your composition in black and white, which can be helpful in certain situations, not seeing color but just seeing kind of exposure and framing, you can turn the live view monochrome, but you're still recording colors. You're not recording black and white, but your live view is going to be black and white. It's actually really helpful in certain situations, so I definitely recommend you try it out, test it out. If you've got a camera that lets you do that and you're not recording black and white, definitely test it. Make sure that you're not recording black and white, because I assume everyone wants to record in color. But sometimes viewing in black and white can help you see the world a different way, and kind of maybe you want to change your overall composition or your location based on what it looks like in black and white, because that can help kind of show kind of the native contrast without the color contrast, if that makes sense. Constant preview. This is for any like settings in the photo mode, that basically whatever you set in terms of aperture, ISO, shutter speed, it's going to show on the LCD, and it's not, the LCD is not, some cameras, what I should say is sometimes the LCD shows you what it thinks is proper exposure, but it doesn't actually reflect your settings. Constant preview makes your settings always reflect on the LCD, so you probably want this on. Peaking, I've talked about peaking in the past. I do not like extra color pixels getting in the way of me seeing what's actually in focus. I think peaking is a helpful tool if you want to kind of check. It's kind of like peaking is like a backup for me. I wouldn't use it just because I think it adds unnecessary stuff in the way, and you can't actually see if it's in focus. You just see color that's telling you that it's in focus, but then you're trusting the camera to do your job. And I think if you're shooting, you should see that it's in focus and not rely on some pixel colors, because it's really, it's not actually ensuring anything's in focus. It's just kind of doing its best guess. Here's where you can turn the histogram on. So this is very similar to anyone who shot with the GH4. Very normal looking histogram. Much more limited than the waveform that we were looking at before, but it's a lot smaller. So just as something nice to have that's on in the corner and you can kind of judge exposure quickly, it might not be a bad idea to have that on. Guidelines, you can kind of do some rule of thirds stuff and turn guides on, but again, I don't really like stuff getting in my way of seeing what's how I'm framing. I kind of like to just do my framing without the guides, but if you feel like you need the guides, you can turn them on there and kind of pick which ones you want. Center marker, you can turn that on as well, but I think it gets in the way. So me personally, I don't like having it on, but I wouldn't judge you if you turn it on either. Highlight, what is this? I don't know what highlight does, because there's zebra, which is going to show you your overexposed areas or your near overexposed areas. I don't like zebras either. I like to just look at it and see if it's blown out or not. They can be helpful if you need them, but I'd say probably just leave them off. It just muddies up the picture and you can't see what you're actually recording. You only just see all these zebra lines. Exposure meter. I like the exposure meter on for sure, so you can kind of see what the camera is telling you is exposed properly or not, or whether it's under or over. So I think that should probably be on. But if for some reason you wanted to turn it off, go right ahead. Manual focus guide on or off. I don't know what that does, actually. Let me see. I don't see it really changing anything. So it may be on when it punches in for manual focus. We've got live view, LVF, monitor, display set. So this is basically the monitor style. Right now I've got it set to where kind of everything's overlapping with the picture, but you can set it to where your settings are outside. All your settings are outside of the frame. I think that's not as nice looking. The picture gets smaller, but technically it's not as cluttered with your settings. It depends on your personal preference, but you can actually set it based on the LCD and the LVF. They call it LVF, it's also the EVF, basically the eyepiece that you're looking through, how you want it to look. Monitor, info display, you can turn the info on or off. Video priority display, I don't know what that does, actually. Menu guide, on, lens position resume. I don't know what that does either, but lots of things for me to play around with and test out. And profile setup. What in the world? I don't know what this is. It's a couple babies and a dog. That's where you need to get the instruction manual out, because who in the world would know what that is? Next, we've got the other kind of wrench gear menu, and we're going to go back up to page 1. And this is for kind of more global settings that are kind of affecting everything, not the kind of in-depth stuff that's in that C. I believe it's for custom. So this is for kind of like your custom individual settings, and this is more for kind of like global settings. Online manual. Well, there we go. We can find the online manual right there. They put it front and center for you. Custom set memory, so you can save all your settings to custom profiles on the menu dial. So if you have a specific way that you like to shoot, all the settings you can save to that custom setting, and then just switch to it real quick on the dial, and that makes get it swapping between different settings really fast if you know what you want. Like, it's helpful, but also I think it's kind of dangerous too, because you might be relying on your memory of knowing what a specific custom setting has in it, and maybe one setting's wrong, and if you're not going in and actually checking and changing it yourself, you might go a little bit astray. So just be careful with that. If you're setting up custom menus or custom profiles, just be really careful that you know exactly what they are and exactly what they do. Clock set, pretty straightforward, pretty obvious. World time, also very obvious. Travel date, travel setup. I don't know what that's for. If that maybe you're traveling and you want to tell it you're somewhere else, that's kind of neat. Wi-Fi, you can turn Wi-Fi on the GH5, also like the GH4, very similar, and you can get a live feed. And I think there's actually a new app that lets you do a Wi-Fi live view with your phone and actually go full screen, unlike the Panasonic app, which they, to my knowledge, they have not updated that to how you do full screen video. Wow. But someone else made an app, so you can check that out on the App Store. I think it's called G Monitor. I don't know. I haven't played around with it much myself, but I just saw that it came out. I think it's like $2 or $3. So download it if you want. Bluetooth. You can set up a Bluetooth connection as well as Wi-Fi if you want. Beep. This is one of the first things I do is I turn the camera to silent. I don't want it making any noise. I don't want it distracting me or the people around me, so I just turn all those sounds off. But if you like them, hey, go for it. Headphone volume. It's pretty straightforward. It's the volume of the headphone, so set it to what you want. Economy, this is where your kind of power save settings are. Also very similar to the GH4. Live view mode, you can do 30 frames or 60 frames. I've always kept it to 60 just because I want that display kind of refreshing as fast as possible. But if for some reason you want it to 30, go for 30. Monitor display, you can kind of tweak your contrast, saturation, tint, and everything in here. I leave it as default just because I think that's pretty close to what's actually being recorded. Monitor luminance, I've actually got this turned down for my recording right now just so the screen isn't blowing out the other camera that's capturing it. You can set it to auto, but most of the time I set it to 1, the brightest, just so I can see it in any condition, whether it's dark or bright. But right now I'm going to set it back down to 3. That's kind of the dimmest setting. Eye sensor, the eye sensor always bugs me, and inevitably it always gets bumped, and it's always constantly switching between the EVF and the LCD. So maybe I should turn the sensitivity down on the GH5, but here's where you do that if you want. USB mode, if you're going to connect a USB cable to the GH5, that's where you would adjust those settings, but I can't imagine a lot of people are going to be doing that. TV connection, HDMI mode, play. So here's where we've got, if you're connected to a TV, kind of basically the interaction between the camera and the TV. But again, I can't imagine that's going to be a common thing of like playback. You know, are you going to watch movies from your SD card on a TV? Maybe, I guess. System frequency, depending on where you live, or if you want that true 24 frames a second cinema mode. I'm in the US, so I'm going to do NTSC, but if you are over in Europe or somewhere else, you might probably PAL. PAL seems to be more common globally than NTSC, but for me, I'm sticking with NTSC. Language, I'm not going to switch it to any of these because I want to be able to keep it in a language that I'm familiar with, so I'm going to keep it to English, but you can switch if you want. And here's our body and lens firmware, just in case you wanted to check the firmware. Maybe it's a rental a few months down the line. Panasonic has said they're going to come out with a bunch of firmware upgrades for the GH5, unlocking some higher bit rates, some different codec options. So if you got a rental or something, or you weren't sure about your firmware version, that's where you check it there. And then activate. I believe this is where you activate Vlog L. It's possible that they might be shipping some cameras with it. It's still really confusing, and I'm not 100% sure exactly who gets what, because I know in different countries, if you pre-ordered, you got Vlog, but I don't think that's necessarily the case in the US. But Lens Rentals, this camera they sent had Vlog already loaded on it, and it wasn't really like an option to like get one without it. So I'm not exactly sure how that all works, but I assume if you don't have Vlog on the GH5 for some reason and you want it, you'd activate it through there. Double slot function. So the GH5 has 2 SD card slots, which is an upgrade from the GH4, and you can actually have some cool options in here on how those dual card slots play. You can do a relay record, and this is a very traditional where when the first card gets full, it bumps over to the second. Very common, very straightforward. We've got a backup record, so whatever's recorded to the first card is also recorded to the second card. Another option if you're concerned about protecting your footage or your photos. But then the third option, we've got an allocation record where you can actually tell it what to record where, and so you can, one thing that was frustrating on the GH4 is that whether you recorded video or photo, it was all kind of in just one master list, so kind of copying footage over after the fact became kind of a burden. But on the GH5, you could just send your photos to one card and your videos to the other card. And that's really, really helpful just for organizational purposes. When you're dumping cards, copying stuff over, it's a lot easier, I think, and a lot cleaner if you've got one file type on one card and another file type on the other. But you can set it up however you'd like. We've got number reset. So this would be as you take photos and as you take videos, they're constantly getting new names, new numbers. If for some reason you wanted to reset that back to 0, you could do it here to the slot itself, but I wouldn't recommend doing that. I kind of like seeing the numbers get bigger and bigger, higher and higher. Reset, this is going to reset the record settings. No, we don't want to do that. No, we don't want to do that. Reset face recognition profile for custom. No, we don't want to do that. Reset, no, we don't want to redo that. We don't want to reset anything, but if you did, that's where you do it. You can also reset your network settings. If for some reason you've got some pixels that are acting weird, maybe there's some hot pixels or dead pixels, you can try a pixel refresh here. You know, probably not something you need to do all that frequently, but if you do notice a problem, you can do it there. We've got sensor cleaning, also pretty straightforward. If the sensor seems dirty, you got some specks of dust on your footage or on your photos, you can try cleaning it with the internal setting here. It's going to kind of electronically vibrate the sensor to kind of shake some stuff off. But oftentimes if dirt is a problem, you probably need to clean your sensor yourself manually, opening it up, getting a cleaning kit. Level gauge adjust. So sound of the camera unknown horizontal. Okay. I should probably go back. The camera on the display, there's that green line that lets you know your level. I think it's a very useful feature to have just so you can know you're perfectly aligned with the horizon. But if for some reason your camera got out of whack, you can reset it here if it does seem to be acting weird, where it's telling you it's level and it's not. And then format. This gets used all the time. You know, if you've got cards that have been dumped and you want to kind of start with a clean slate, click format, delete all the content on there. I use it format. Pretty much that's the only reason I go into this menu on the GH4 is for format. Because once everything's set, it's usually set the way I want, and all I need to go in here is to just format those SD cards. And we've got my menu settings. This is all junk that I don't ever really play around with. Maybe I should explore it a little bit more to see if there's anything useful in here. But this is like, you can make a quick list of like stuff that you want easy access to. But what I don't like about it is once you make a list of like the stuff you like, you can end up relying on that, and then you forget where other stuff is that you don't use as much. And if it's not in that list, you might take you longer to find it. I like getting really used to the layout of the menu and knowing exactly like, oh, page 2, that's where it's at, or I need to go to this menu, page 3. I like knowing where all the menu items are at, so if something's a problem or I need to change something on the fly, I'm not stuck, spending 10 minutes trying to find it and hunt it down in the menus, because no matter what camera you use, the menus are always more overwhelming than they probably should be, but there's a lot of features. So making a cheat sheet or a quick menu, like a custom menu for yourself, can be beneficial because you can put some stuff there, but I wouldn't rely on it. I'd recommend getting more comfortable with the actual menu system. And then we've got some of the playback options. This is another thing that I don't ever really mess around with. You can set up a slideshow. You can change the playback mode. You can protect certain cards. You can set a rating. What I do use this for is sometimes for raw processing. If let's say I only shot raw and I didn't shoot JPEG, and I wanted to process a raw photo into a JPEG and do some kind of adjustments, I could do that there. And then we've also got some of the new 4K, 6K photo options, light composition, clear, retouch, text stamp, resize, cropping, rotate, video divide, time-lapse video. So this is what I was going to say I use this menu for. If, let's say I was doing a time-lapse, and I do those frequently on the GH4, I love that I can just do it internally, and you can do the same thing on the GH5. But for whatever, and I always build the videos in camera as well. So I take all the photos, but then I have it process those photos into a video. If for some reason the power dies or that someone forgets to do it, you can go in here and you can kind of reprocess those photos into a time-lapse movie file. So if you ever do a time-lapse and you don't get the movie file in camera, and you just have the photos, you would go here to kind of have that option pop back up. And then we got a few other options, but really nothing that we need to worry about. And that's it. So there are definitely some things in here I need to do a little bit more research on, but all the important stuff is here. I'm glad to see that there's not anything significantly absent that I've noticed from the GH4. They've kept everything. They've kept the time lapse, and they've added new stuff. The waveform was a nice standout. I remember Panasonic mentioning that was going to be a feature, but I had kind of forgot because it's such a small thing. But when you see it and see this kind of waveform on a consumer entry-level type camera, it's actually really, it just made me smile, you know, seeing that this kind of feature was on a camera, as well as being able to monitor LUTs, you know, being able to turn a LUT on for Vlog-L right in the camera. So handy. I've been using it all day, and it's been just a pleasure to shoot with. The only thing that I'm really noticing in terms of first impressions that has been disappointing with the GH5 is the autofocus. I've really got to do some more testing because there's people saying that it's great and there's people saying that it sucks. I don't know where I stand on it yet, but everything right now about the GH5 in terms of the features that have been advertised and kind of promoted, it all looks really good. It's definitely got more pro features than the GH4, definitely an upgrade over the GH4. The one thing, and I've got to do more videos about this, is just that even though they've added more frame rates and more better codec options, they really haven't changed much of the dynamic range and the image quality itself. And that's my biggest frustration with the GH5, if I had one. It's that it is really just like a GH4 on steroids, or kind of beefed up with some extra features, but at the end of the day, when you compare the pictures side by side, they're virtually identical. And I got to do some more tests on that to really kind of show it, and maybe the GH5 will surprise me and it will be a lot better than the GH4, but my initial gut impressions and based on the stuff that I've shot today is that yes, there's a lot of new features. Yes, there's stuff that you can't do with the GH4 that you can definitely do with the GH5. But at the end of the day, what does the footage look like? What does the picture look like? And it looks very, very similar. But like I said, I've got to do more research. I got to do more testing on that. I can't draw a definitive line. Definitely very loose first impression, so take it with a grain of salt. I could change my mind tomorrow. But if I do have any updates on that, I will be sure to share them with you guys, let you know my thoughts on the GH5, show some more test footage, do a little bit more commentary, do a proper maybe review. We'll see. But I'm so into camera menus and just how they're laid out and all the different options that you have. I thought it'd be fun to walk through some of these features or where things are at, just for people who maybe haven't had a chance to get their hands on this camera yet.